agent said, that's James Dean. And I turned around and audibly said, that's James Dean?
A young man from a small town with a very large imagination.
Take it easy driving. Life, you might say, might be mine.
He was much more beautiful to me, and much more interesting, and much more complicated than any of the parts that he played, or any of the performances that you saw.
I didn't really need to cheat. Well, even if I had flunked my final exam, I'd still had high enough average to get through. I don't know why I did that.
He was truly, truly a unique genius with an incredible charisma.
I don't like to beg. I don't know that I've ever done it before. But I'm begging now.
Oh, now, look, old man, we don't like this any...
Well, I know I did something that was very wrong. I know that. And I'm not excusing myself for it. But you just can't expel me. See, it isn't just me. My grandfather and my father, they went to school here. And they're coming here from the coast next week for commencement. Please, don't expel me. Please.
James Dean is unquestionably the first star of the pop culture, and in a certain way he generated it. He was the last star of the Hollywood studio system and the first star of the new teen culture.
His death might have been a blessing as far as his becoming, in a sense, in the cinema sense, immortal or an icon to younger generations.
Almost the instant he died, he began to become a myth. It didn't take time, it didn't grow, it didn't evolve, it happened. It happened overnight.
In Dean's rebellion, certainly in the Nicholas Ray film, in Rebel Without a Cause, a real mold breaker. And so in that case, you know, he was the flag bearer, the standard bearer for this kind of rebellion against what was going on at the time.
At that first meeting, I never realized that he was as closed off to new people as he was, which he was. I mean, he was very, very wary of new people until he got to know them.
He was sitting at a counter on a stool, and he had a cup of coffee. My agent went up and said, James Dean, this is Dennis Hopper. Dennis is going to be in Rebel Without a Cause with you anyway. Yeah, okay, good.
He was passionate about the road he was taking, but it was a straight road. There was no other direction to go in. He didn't even think twice about a direction to go in other than being understood as an artist.
We were always wondering, trying to find, and I think that was our connection. I came from the cotton fields of South Carolina, James Dean from Indiana. I mean, we were really country folk. So we always felt we were lost, looking up at these tremendously tall buildings. And we realized this is a vast city we're in. And we're only two very tiny people. How are we going to fit into this huge world?
I remember it was while we were together as friends and lovers. It was a very naive time. It was a naive time in our business in New York. We both wanted to do theater. Of course, we always were talking about that. And we did television, and it was wonderful because it was live, and it was as close as you could get to the living stage.
Oh, Maurice, don't you see? It's you. It's you. When I'm not with you, not seeing you, not looking at you, I feel shut off, alone in the world.
I was watching television, and I saw a dramatic show.
What? This is the atomic age, man. Oh, for crying out loud, Ron.
All right.
It wasn't my fault.
It just serves me right.
Golly, I'm awful sorry, Miss Loomis.
Look, after all, I didn't do it on purpose. You don't have to blame me.
Why, Bronco, I'm not blaming you. It was my fault. I just can't do the wild dances you kids do.
Well, he could have been more careful. Everybody blames me.
One of the barbarians was played by a young blonde fellow who was so authentic. I said, that kid can't be an actor. He's too real. It was, as we now know, James Dean playing that part. And from that moment, I've been convinced to the present that he is one of the great actors of the century.
We met at an open casting call. CBS used to hold these weekly endeavors in a Broadway theater. Once a week, they would pull actors in off the streets. We'd get numbers, and we'd go up and parade past the casting department, 10 at a time, and if you were right for any of the small parts, you were singled out, and you got a chance to read for them.
He won't write.
I will so. Ma, I'll write you every single day. Honest, I will. Well, this is it.
And remember one thing.
Yes, Ma.
Clothes make the man. Put up a good front, the world is yours.
Oh, Ma, I'm going to remember that. I really am.
I tried to help him professionally by recommending him because I was a fan of his. I believed in him. And as soon as I was directing a show, I hired him. It was the Thanksgiving show, 1953. This was a script which starred Dorothy Gish, who was still a very big star. And playing her husband was Ed Begley, who was just beginning to become an important stage actor. And the part of the boy I thought was perfect for Jimmy. So Jimmy got the part.
Oh, yes, Your Royal Highness, Queen Arlene.
Oh, Paul. Now, Paul, I don't like you to do things like that or say things like that to me.
Okay. Everything I do annoys you. I guess you'll be glad to get back to that big city pretty soon.
And it went very smoothly. He was very good. The show was very well received at that time. That was our first working experience, and I found him most cooperative. He came across like $1 million, and everybody liked him.
Here you are, Paul. Haven't worn it since you came back from the cleaners. Silly business having to wear a coat like this, especially when we're way out here in the country. It's supposed to be roughing it, huh? Well, anything to please the ladies, I guess.
Television in the 50s, the material came more from the theater, but technically it was all live. There was no tape, there was no film, except sometimes there might be a filmed introduction to something. The rehearsal process was very severe. Monday we would be in a rehearsal hall. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday the floor plan would be laid out in the rehearsal hall. And on Friday afternoon, I remember we always had to have a run-through. Sunday, we would be in the studio blocking, and finish the blocking on Monday and go on the air that night. And if things went wrong, they went wrong.
He started to audition for bigger parts on the Kraft Playhouse and Playhouse 90 and different shows like that. And he started to get them left and right. I mean, he was really good. He stood out. I think that he was a serious actor, and very real and very natural, and had a quality that you want to see more of him.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Oh, give me that.
Last week you were in trouble with the juvenile authorities for smoking marijuana. What's going to become of you, boy?
I'll manage, all right, thank you. You don't have to worry about me.
I can't let you stay here, Bronco, if you're going to drink. Give me that bottle and you can sit there.
I'm not going to take orders from you.
Now, look, boy, Someday you're going to have to take orders from someone.
Don't give us any back talk, you little goon. Kids like you just litter up a place causing trouble.
Buzz, don't. He's just a boy.
Hey, take it easy, Buzz. I'm not running any torture chamber.
I know how to handle his kind better than you. I'll straighten him out.
You're a phony!
He said, I don't think that you should learn your lines too well. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, as an actor, if you don't learn the lines too well, if you have to search for them, he said, it makes it look much more natural. And I was thinking about that, and then I said, it sounds good, but I don't think it would be practical. I said, I'd be a nervous wreck out there if I didn't know my lines real well. He said, well, I wouldn't. He said, I think that's the trick to acting. He says, not to know the lines too well.
Look, we had the doctor in this morning, about 3 o'clock. He says to me, you got to get this kid to a hot and dry climate. He keeps telling me like he hasn't told me 100 times already.
Well, now, maybe there are other ways of getting that little money.
What other ways?
Well, now, let's think about it.
Yeah, let's think about it. You listen to me, Pop. You know, the doctor gives me a prescription. He says, you got to get this filled this morning. Well, you know how much it's going to cost? $9. $9. My wife's coming up this morning, well, about 12. She's going to pick up my pay envelope. You know why? Because we haven't got a cent. We haven't got a red cent in the house.
When I met him at the rehearsal club, and we became very close very fast, we spent more time on the telephone talking to each other and decided this is ridiculous, so we moved in with each other because we missed each other all the time. I washed his underwear. He taught me how to draw, sketch, because he was good at it. But he taught me how to just, how did he put it? Just look at something and just see it. Well, it sounds so simple. It's not that simple. But he said it is simple. You just look at it and see it, and then you draw it.
Well, I saw Jimmy for the first time in some experimental play, and I was supposed to do some music for it. I said, who's that actor? He's very good. And he said, well, that kid is very tough. His name is James Dean, and he sleeps on razor blades.
Sonny boy, you ain't leaving while I'm out 20 clams. 5 minutes.
5 minutes can mean the difference. I win or lose.
What do you want from me, for Pete's sake?
I want you should stay here, or you give me a chance to get even, you little punk.
He was very, very mercurial. He could be very, very high, and he could be very, very low. He could be very mean. He could be very sweet. He could be very, very funny. And he could be very nasty. And he was all of those things, and you never were quite sure just how the lay of the land was going to be.
Hello, Isabel.
Were you looking for something upstairs?
No.
You never come to the tower. You never come to visit your father and me here.
Excuse me?
Wouldn't you like to join your father and the others in the billiard room? I'm sure he'd be pleased if you'd...
No. Thank you very much.
Fernand, wait. What are we to do, you and I? Usually it's a woman's privilege to be pursued. But here am I, trying to make friends with you and making absolutely no headway. Must it be war, Fernand? Please, a truce. There, you smiled.
Did I?
Fernand, are you angry with your father for having married again? Or is it just me?
Maybe it's me.
A friend of mine, a young student, acting student, called up and said, Roy, I've met a genius, and I want you to meet him. Well, I've met a lot of people called geniuses, and I hated every one of them. He says, we're right around the corner, so I said, come on in. And in she came, and this guy, this very ugly-looking guy, glasses, and bent over, and he sat over on the couch. Arlene said, he's a genius, I tell you. And as she said that, Jimmy gets up, had taken his glasses off. Well, that was a change. This ugly thing, this this bow-legged and pigeon-toed whatever guy stands up straight and delightfully handsome and graceful and moves around the room and shocked the hell out of me.
The first time, I think, that we sat across from each other at the table, and it wasn't a date, we were with other people, is he dropped his front teeth in the beer. He liked to do that, just for the surprise element. He had some loose teeth in front that his father, who was a dentist, fitted him with, and nobody knew that. And he liked to spit his teeth out into his drinks. That was funny.
We actually had a friend, Bobby Heller, worked at the Museum of Modern Art and would get us cards free. I don't think I've ever mentioned this before, but we weren't even there legally. I mean, but we have flashed our cards. We go in. We had a run of the museum. I mean, it was great. And a cold winter's day in New York, on the roof, coffee, food, friends. It was like Paris in the Impressionist days. It was great.
We walked around the streets at night, when it was very late. I danced all the time in the sidewalks when nobody was around and there was no traffic. That was my thing. I just danced. I loved to dance. We went to the park. He had a blood-stained cape that somebody had given him that belonged to a bullfighter, and he would be the matador and I would be the bull. And I never got to be the matador, which I still resent, and I'm sure he knows.
He suddenly came to my house around 11 o'clock at night. I didn't recognize him. I didn't remember him. And identified himself and asked if I would teach him piano. He wasn't a very good student. He didn't understand why overnight he couldn't play it totally advanced like a person who's been playing for 20 years. I think that all of his learning processes had to do with the fact that his teachers, even if they were his age, his teachers were parental characters, because he didn't have parents.
He said he would like to learn photography from me. And so he became my student, and we had lots of fun. Most of the time, his stuff was really way out, eerie, frightening, actually. He was trying to say something about Jimmy Dean, always.
He wanted to move like me. He wanted me to teach him stage presence. How do I move my body in accord to the rhythm of how I'm speaking.
Crazy man, crazy. Crazy man, crazy. Crazy man, crazy.
Everything is a kind of rhythm. Talking, like singing, dancing, phrasing, thinking. All comes under a certain kind of rhythm that maybe only you can feel and interpret.
He took so much time to do all these nuances, which he knew what they meant, and the viewing audience might have caught it, might not. I think that's exactly what made Jimmy the most fascinating performer that he was that he did have an inner story going on.
I know what you want to tell me.
You do?
You want to tell me you love me, don't you? Isn't that it?
Well, yes, I do, but...
And I love you, Walter. Always love you.
Jimmy knew how he looked. He would actually aim himself at the camera and knew which side looked best. His face was amazing for the camera.
I think the camera did love him, yes. It brought out a lot in him, but Jimmy was also very good on stage. I saw the 2 plays that he did, and I remember the first one, See the Jaguar, which only ran a few days. He really stood out in that little part that he had in that. So I don't know it was just the camera. I think that when Jimmy was working, he worked from his feet to the top of his head. He had a whole body acting that not every actor can do. There was not an awkward bone in his body, and he was like a ballet dancer.
We hitchhiked to Indiana. We got on the New Jersey Turnpike. Jimmy stuck his finger out, and we went to Indiana. But when we got there, we met Jimmy's aunt and uncle, who had brought him up from a little boy, and his cousin Marcus. And we had a wonderful time.
This was the house that Jimmy came to live in 1940. The farm here is pretty much the way it was when Jimmy lived here. The house it hasn't changed but very little. Jimmy was here when I was born, so I can just always remember him being here. Jimmy, to me, was just always like an older brother. Jimmy used to help Dad bale hay. Jimmy'd get some of his friends from town to come out and help him. They'd, of course, bale the hay in the field and then bring it up and put it in the barn. Jimmy and his friends would play up in the hay mound. They'd build tunnels in the straw and in the hay. Jimmy used to play basketball on the basketball team, and of course him and his friends would come out and they'd practice basketball in the barn. Back in apparently 1944, they did away with the wooden scales in the barn and filled the hole in and cemented over it. And Jimmy has put his handprint and his footprint in the cement.
It was from his agent. He got a call that he got the job in See the Jaguar, so we had to go back. I remember feeling sad about it because it was safe where we were. Going back into the unknown, the big city, a job that might very well separate all of us, it made me uneasy. Opening night came to See the Jaguar, and I thought that I didn't look dressed up enough, that I wouldn't please him. And it was his night, not mine, you know. And the reviews were wonderful for Jimmy, so he was just so full of himself, and rightly so. And the sadness was there, that he's disappearing. He's disappearing. His career is coming to fruition. He's being taken away.
He invited me one day to the last play that he ever did, the last performance of the last play he ever did, which was, of course, The Immoralist. I remember when I got to the theater, it was the Royale. I marched up to the box office and said, I believe this is Miss Franklin, and I think that you have a ticket for me. And they looked through and he said, no, no ticket. So I said, oh, well, would you tell Mr. Dean that Miss Franklin is there? And they said, yes, and came back and gave me the ticket. At the same time, another young man came up, and he said, Mr. So-and-so is here. I think that Mr. Dean has left a ticket for me. And they said, no. So it was obvious that he was very absent-minded about this very kind offer he'd made to comp us in for tickets. Jimmy played the Arab boy sent over from the date fields to tempt Gide. From the moment your eyes caught him, you could not look at anybody else on the stage, including Geraldine Page, which was pretty amazing because she was a powerful magnet. I was amazed because it was obvious that whatever the Actors Studio had done for him, it had opened floodgates that had never been tapped before. And whatever he had inside him was now available to other people. And it was really a stunning thing to see. So afterwards, we then went downstairs, and waiting downstairs was the other young man who'd gotten a ticket. We all went off to have some coffee at a nearby Schraft's. So over coffee, the two boys began to talk, and I suddenly realized that Jimmy had a brother. I'd never heard about a brother. I certainly was never aware that he had a brother, but the other boy and he were brothers, and when they were brought up, Jimmy always felt that his father far preferred the other brother to him. I was listening to this for a while, and something made me back up a little bit, and I suddenly realized that these were two actors, studio actors, acting. They were improvising. The other boy was Richard Davalos. They were going to leave on a plane the next day to test for their roles in East of Eden, and that was the very last that I ever saw of Jimmy.
A young man from a small town with a very large imagination lay alone in his room with his radio on, looking for another station. But when the static from the mouthpiece gave way to the sound below, James Dean went out to Hollywood and put his picture in a picture show. James Dean went out to Hollywood and put his picture in a picture show. And it's, oh, Daddy, get off of your knees. Mama, why'd you have to go? Your darling Jim is out on a limb. Put my picture in a picture show. Whoa, whoa, my picture in a picture show.
I think of Jimmy as an extraordinary young man, and he's sort of frozen in my memory as that beautiful young boy when we worked together in East of Eden the summer of 1954. Because I always looked at Jimmy like he was Huckleberry Finn. He was always had a scam going somewhere or an adventure he was looking for. He was full of curiosity and full of excitement, and he wanted people to get riled up. He enjoyed that.
Dean was among those people between the 50s and 60s who changed the acting of the world. Everybody started to be more personal about their work and more emotionally free and expose more of themselves. And Dean was part of that.
And there was a kind of truth going on, a kind of search for a way to get at the honest center of work that had not been tried before and was going against everything that acting had been on the screen up till that time. It was quite amazing to see.
I at the time thought I was the best young actor in the world. First time I saw Jimmy work was just amazing. I was really very proficient, what I call the English school of acting, where I did line readings, gestures, preconceived everything, knew exactly what I was going to do. And it was the first time I'd ever seen anybody improvise or create things that weren't on the written page.
That's exactly what I think of when I think of Dean's work. He wasn't acting, you know, he was being.
You got to start learning how to do things and not show them. And I said, what does that mean, do something and not show it? And he said, well, like if you smoke a cigarette, you got to learn to smoke the cigarette, not act smoking the cigarette. You know, just smoke the cigarette. If you're drinking like a cup of coffee or a drink or whatever, you've got to drink the drink, not act drinking the drink. And if you're looking, you've got to look. The easiest thing to do is to act that. But in point of fact, you must really look, really drink, really smoke, and really be in the moment-to-moment reality, moment-to-moment reality, and never preconceive any ideas about how the scene should turn out, or whatever.
For example, the very famous birthday scene where Jimmy runs out crying, where he tries to give his father the money and the father refuses to take it at East of Eden. He prepared himself to such a degree that Julie Harris came to me and said, you know, your friend, there's something wrong with him. He's crying all the time. And I said, well, I know him. He's preparing for the scene, which he did, but he cried all day long.
I was watching the work, and the work was incredible, so I didn't know what he was doing, but I wanted to know. And then on the Chickie run, and Rebel Without a Cause, I finally physically grabbed him, threw him in the car, and I said, I gotta know what you're doing. How could he help me? How could he help me understand to do this? And he said, he asked me before he volunteered any information about the work, he asked me if I hated my mother and my father. And I thought this was strange questioning, you know, and he said, you did, didn't you? And I said, well, yeah, I did. I resented them and I hated them. He said, they want you to do something else besides be an actor? And I said, yeah, they want me to be an engineer, lawyer, doctor, something, you know, anything but an actor. And he said, well, that's why you want to be an actor, because of that. And he said, I lost my mother when I was very young, and when she first when she first left me, I used to go to her grave. I used to sneak out and go to her grave and cry on her grave and say, Mother, Mother, why did you leave me? And that turned into, Mother, I hate you, I resent you, I'm going to show you, I'm going to be somebody, I'm going to be great.
All you have to know is that at the age of 9, he lost his mother, and his father sent him away with his mother's body to his uncle in Indiana. And the result was that he lost both parents simultaneously.
If we had anything in common, I would say the belief that there was poetry in life, poetry in quotation marks. And he had a sensitivity that appealed to me, and we got along pretty good that way. I never, when he was in trouble, I was very flattered because he didn't call many people, as far as I know, when he was in trouble, that's for sure.
He would watch me act and give me tips. He asked me to watch him as an old man when he was working with Carol Baker. He kept saying, do I look old enough? And I said, Jimmy, you look so old, it looks like you're so decrepit that there's no way in the world you could even make love to this girl, much less marry her. I mean, there's no way, you know, I mean, you really look, he was very happy about the fact that I thought that he looked that old.
The last day of shooting, I wanted to say goodbye to Jimmy, and I knocked at the door, and there was no answer, and I knocked again, and then I could hear, like, muffled sobs, and he came to the door just weeping. I said, what's the matter? He said, it's all over. It's all over. And I thought an experience that has been meaningful to us is suddenly taken away, and you say, I mean, you mourn. There's a period and separation when the actor mourns for what he's lost. And this boy was giving way to that, and there was no one there.
He didn't like Hollywood because he found fame, the way he was being treated, as a business, as a piece of flesh, as a thing now. It was not becoming beautiful to him anymore.
It was like a kid who came home. He had been tipped off there was a surprise party, and he came through the door, there was no party at all. And he would be stunned, upset and angry.
He used to say that he's interested in fighting death. And I used to say to him, well, Jimmy, you know, it's going to win.
And I think now, when I was with him in Hollywood, and he met me at the door because he had been staying with Arthur Lowe, he opened the door for me, and we hugged one another, like we always did. I didn't feel him. I didn't feel his spirit. And I said, Jamie, what are they doing to you here in Hollywood? I don't feel your spirit. I said that. I don't feel your spirit. And he said, oh, Kitt, you run, he said something to me like, you run one of your voodoo trips again.
We asked Jimmy over today because he's a racing man himself. A real one, not a crazy one. Have you ever been in a drag race?
Are you kidding me?
We probably have a great many young people watching our show tonight, and for their benefit, I'd like your opinion about fast driving on the highway. Do you think it's a good idea?
A good point. I used to fly around quite a bit, you know. I took a lot of unnecessary chances on the highways. And I started racing, and now I drive on the highways. I'm extra cautious. People say racing is dangerous, but I'll take my chances on the track any day than on a highway. Well, Gig, I think I'd better take off.
Oh, wait a minute, Jimmy. One more question. Do you have any special advice for the young people who drive?
Take it easy driving. Life, you might say, might be mine.
I went on to Las Vegas, I think the next day, to open my show. And it was a few days later that one of the girls in the chorus came to my dressing room and she said, "Jamie's dead." I already knew it. He was gone the Sunday before when I had hugged him. And he wasn't there.
I was just devastated by his death. I don't think I've ever gotten over it. It blew my whole sense of destiny and how things operate in this strange life that we're all involved in here on this planet. But I just couldn't believe that somebody as talented, as gifted, and as extraordinary as James Dean died before his potential was fulfilled.
I can't think of another actor who achieved stardom so quickly, who held it for such a short time, and then kept it for such a long time. James Dean became a star in one calendar year and then left us. But he's still being talked about. He's still being revered. He's still being iconized 40 years later. I don't think there's another example like it in the entire history of movies.
He defined my generation, he defined your generation, he defined it all. I mean, if you look at him, there's no way you can say that he didn't impact your life in some way. I mean, if you're watching this, you know he impacted your life. He meant something to you. You know, it started Generation X, it started every generation, all the bad boys, all the good, you know, it brought out different levels.
Do you know what my love for you is like? Do you know now? Right? Do you? Then don't be afraid. Because I'll be all right, I promise you.
Goodbye.
When I sat down to write Hoosiers, there was an image that I had of James Dean in a basketball uniform, Fairmount High, when he was standing sort of in a defensive position, one hand up over the lower hand. And when I was conceptualizing the characters for Hoosiers, I thought of that picture and thought about a character that would be very much like James Dean, nonverbal, hurting, raw, and vulnerable, but yet a lot of power.
You see, the eternal boy in him is something that as a movie actor, you try very hard to hang on to. because that innocence, that openness is what ultimately makes a star.
The reason why he's a legend is because the roles that he played, kind of radical, anti-authoritarian kind of kids that have always, in every generation, become almost like an idol.
He lives on because today's youth have felt so fervently about his spirit and his essential energy. The legacy that he gave all young aspiring actors was to grant you like an instant cool.
The first time I saw James Dean, a girl who worked in the neighborhood came to the front door once and said she wanted to bring over a young actor to see the Marlon Brando sculpture, which I had done. So they came over probably about 20 minutes later. He, for some reason, turned me into a nervous wreck. I couldn't tell you why. To me, he wasn't an important actor. I didn't know what he could do. But it was just, the air was just absolutely electric. And then he turned on a smile, and suddenly he was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. Everyone was just looking at him and saying, hey, wow, you know, this guy's something, and then poof, he's gone. And I actually started the sculpture the night he died. I thought there wasn't any fan club, there wasn't anything, and I thought, if I've got anything to do with it, this kid isn't going to be forgotten.
Okay, James Dean. Each Dean song.
At the memorial service, you will find people from all over the world. It's always been amazing to me how far people come in order to pay tribute to Dean.
When I was about 16, 17 years old, back home in Australia, in Melbourne, I just happened to read something about him in the newspaper, and from then on I was just like hooked straight away. He was just like really different. It was everything I wanted to be.
There is one group which I would refer to as the elders. These are people who are associated with Dean in Fairmount. They're people who grew up with Dean, people who were buddies of Dean, people who taught Dean as teachers, such as Adeline Knoll.
We'll see you. Take care of yourself.
I sure will.
Okay, same time next year, huh?
Same time.
All right.
She was still teaching theater and running the school plays at Fairmount when I was there. And she had a lot of Jimmy stories to tell. In fact, she was always looking for the next Jimmy Dean, too, I believe.
Anytime Adeline Knoll wanted to push us to achieve just a little bit more, she would say, let me tell you about Jim Dean when he was here. You know, Jim Dean sat in that chair right there in the classroom, or Jim Dean stood at that lectern right there and gave the speech. And let me tell you about Jim Dean one day. He was the only one in class prepared to give his speech. He stood up, and in the middle of the speech, he looked in the back row and he saw one of his classmates making faces at him. So he took that as long as he could and finally stopped his speech and went back and popped him right in the mouth.
I think the story she tells about Jimmy as an actor that stuck with me the most, in fact, I think had some influence on what I'm doing now, is how Jimmy got into a mood, how he prepared for the stage, or how he prepared for camera. And he once told Addie that by studying cats, it helped him relax. To him, cats were the most relaxed of all animals on the outside, but yet right under the surface, they were all energy, all tension, all nervousness. And so he would imitate movements of cats like blinking, whereas we blink quickly, cats blink very slowly. And I put a little bit of that into Garfield.
I think James Dean will live forever, and I think that his image will be part of the iconography of this culture for as long as I'm living, and maybe into other generations.
There's many people who've never seen a movie of James Dean that idolize him simply from the posters. The
you know, that with him slouching against the wall, the red jacket, the cigarette dangling. It's a hieroglyphic of teen angst that is just so perfect that really nobody has replaced it.
He always told me how much he wanted to see Europe, and every time I go to Europe, I think, you know, Jimmy never got to Europe. I mean, if I go into a disco in Paris or a disco in Spain or a bar in Moscow, you know, there's James Dean. In our cinema sense of things, he's immortal.
He made just 3 movies, all before the age of 25. And yet, no actor before or since has gained such a foothold in our hearts like James Dean. Even today, his very name stirs up powerful memories of leather jackets, diners and drive-ins, and living on the edge. James Dean will deliver a special brand of cool to 325 million U.S. postage stamps. It'll be a rousing encore appearance for this legendary Hollywood star.